Welcome to part one of this three-part series on lasting habit change. What we're going to be discussing this week is the role of environment. The impact of the environment around us on our habits and how it can make it easier or harder to do certain habits, and then some proactive strategies that you can use to design your environment to make it easier to do the habits that you know you should be doing or you want to be doing, and to stop doing the habits that you know you shouldn't be doing. All just by designing our environment in a proactive way. Anne Thorndike, a primary care physician at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, had a crazy idea. She believed she could improve the eating habits of thousands of hospital staff and visitors without changing their willpower or motivation in the slightest way. In fact, she didn't plan on talking to them at all. Thorndike and her colleagues designed a 6-month study to alter the choice architecture of the hospital cafeteria. They started by changing how drinks were arranged in the room. Originally, the refrigerators located next to the cash registers in the cafeteria were filled with only soda. The researchers added water as an option to each one. Additionally, they placed baskets of bottled water next to the food stations throughout the room. Soda was still in the primary refrigerators, but water was now available at all drink locations. Over the next 3 months, the number of soda sales at the hospital dropped by 11.4%. Meanwhile, sales of bottled water increased by 25.8%. They made similar adjustments and saw similar results with the food in the cafeteria. Nobody had said a word to anyone eating there. People often choose products not because of what they are, but because of where they are. If I walk into the kitchen and see a plate of cookies on the counter, I'll pick up half a dozen and start eating, even if I hadn't been thinking about them beforehand and didn't necessarily feel hungry. If the communal table at the office is always filled with donuts and bagels, it's going to be hard not to grab one every now and then. Your habits change depending on the room you are in and the cues in front of you. So what does this mean? It means that our environment is constantly presenting us with options. And the options that are presented to us by our environment, they can be consciously taken into our control or not, and they can be so-called good options or bad options. And the influence that the environment will have on our, that option, the influence of that option on our decision will be the same as far as impact, regardless of whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, so to speak. Does that make sense? So whether we're presented with the option to eat the donuts or to eat an orange or eat a banana or eat an apple, it's the same influence. It'll be easier to eat the donut if that's the option presented to us. It'll be easier to eat the fruit if that's the option presented to us. Same example, or same phenomenon, but different example. If you have by the side of your bed your phone and as the presented option versus a book as the presented option, it's going to be a lot easier to play on your phone. And mind you, this doesn't mean that you have to only present yourself with the option to read the book or only present yourself with the option to eat the fruit. It's just the easier option. It's the one that's immediate, it's visible, it's easy, and it could be as simple as taking the cookies off the counter, storing them away in the cupboard, and moving, or maybe buying fruit and putting it right there on the counter. And you don't make any other rules or adjustments besides that. You still are perfectly free to get the cookies if you wish to do that, and skip the fruit. But just by having changed the architecture, just that slight little change, that one-time change, it's going to be so much easier to make the right decision because of the option that you presented yourself with. So I hope this makes sense. In this section, really all I wanted to do is to present the power of the environment, the sheer power of the environment that it has over our decisions. And I hope I've really hammered it in how much it's underestimated, like how much it plays into it, how important it is that we take conscious control over it to the best degree that we can. And to illustrate that power in one more way before we move on to the next section, which I'll share with you some more concrete tips on exactly how to design your environment that includes a little bit more than just simply rearranging, because you can add a little bit more structure and benefit from it. Before I go into that, I just want to give you a couple of kind of bullet point examples of how this conscious choice architecture environment design has helped me. Okay, so here we go. The first one, and probably I want to say the most important one, I'm not positive on that, but definitely one of the more important ones, is better sleep, more consistent sleep. Because I can sleep on time usually, and as long as I'm in my bed and I know, I'm trying not to go into detail. Better sleep, more consistent sleep, on time sleep, easier sleep. Number two, no pornography. And this has been just, it's a little embarrassing to have to admit that, but it is very important, especially for us guys, in this age. I know it's a big thing, and it's just by the environment itself and some of the tips that I'll give you in the next section. I've literally been able to eradicate pornography from my life, and I'm so proud and grateful that I'm able to say that honestly. And then the last one I have here is just greater productivity and greater self-trust, which kind of go hand in hand, because for a long time I've been lost and afraid, lost and confused, and kind of running around like just without a clear sense of direction. And I still feel like I'm kind of clawing my way out of that. But just having it, like for example, this room alone, this is my home office, and I have the bookshelf behind me as an intentional example of what's expected in this room. It has sort of like its own purpose, and that's one of the tips I'll go into the next section. And that alone, that understanding that that's what's expected in here, it just makes it easier to stay on track. I know that I'm not supposed to be watching movies or listening to music or whatever. And even if that's not a strict rule, it's still easier. So I hope that you're as excited as I am. Let's go ahead and get now into the concrete strategies that you can use to design your environment for yourself. Number one, consider the people in your environment and whether they are having a positive influence on your decisions or a negative influence on your decisions. And positive and negative are defined according to you. You are free to choose what positive means and what negative means, but rule out the possibility that the people that you're surrounding yourself with are having no influence on your decisions, because they are. If you spend a significant amount of time with anybody, they will be influencing your decisions. It's just guaranteed. Number two, rules. And under rules, I have 3 examples that I'm going to try to list out here just for sake of time. A, specific declarations. That just means what, when, and where. What am I going to do specifically? Where am I going to do it? Or where am I going to go to do it? And what time am I going to go do it? Or for how long am I going to do it, if that's relevant? B, room assignments, or if you don't have the luxury of multiple rooms, then space assignments. An assignment could be work area or office, bed or sleep or read, cooking, eating, etc. Okay, and that specific, assignment of this is what this area is for will make it very easy for your brain to understand, okay, I'm here, this is what's expected, and it's going to be, so anyway. C, and C is going to take a little bit more self-trust to actually follow through with, but it's going to be so powerful if you do have the courage to take it on, and you have, even if you can hold it up for like a couple of weeks, it's going to be so, powerful to your self-trust and so powerful to your productivity or whatever else is important to you. Here it is. Commands and forbids. Okay, so what do I mean by that? A command is something that is required. So for example, I have the command to work in this room, my home office, from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And now, admittedly, I have not perfectly followed that command. And actually, another command that I have is to dress up during that time. I'm working in that time frame right now, and I'm not dressed up. So I'm breaking my own rules right now, my commands. But, it's not the end of the world. It's more of a guideline. The forbids are really, at least for me, they're more important. And for whatever reason, they're a lot easier to follow. So, a forbid, if you haven't guessed it already, is something that is the opposite. It is not required, but forbidden. You're not allowed to do something. So an example for me, how I said earlier in the video how the conscious design of my environment had permitted me to literally eradicate pornography from my life. That's because in this new household that I'm in, and I'll explain that tip as a kind of complementary tip to this one, this new household that I'm in, I declared there will be no pornography in this household. As soon as I moved in, I made that declaration, and that way I've been able to follow it since then. I've been living, I don't know how long I've been in here, but forbidden, and now the decision-making fatigue is no longer there. The burden of making the decision, do I defect now or do I not? Like facing the temptation, even if I have the temptation, I know, oh, it's not allowed here. So it's easy. Number 3 is novelty. Novelty. That's what I just referenced with the whole pornography thing. I said, as soon as I moved into my new house, I knew I had this opportunity of a novel environment, because with a novel environment, there's not set in patterns that are already sort of governing your behavior. And so you have this opportunity, if you have the luxury of entering yourself into a new environment, you have the opportunity to kind of like a fresh slate, you have a fresh slate, and patterns will emerge, whether you design them consciously or not, patterns will emerge. And so if you know about this stuff, you should probably do it consciously, right? Because they're going to emerge anyway. So anyway, that's how I did it. I knew that I had the opportunity of novelty. I'm not going to explain it anymore for sake of time, but the last thing that I'll say here before moving on to the outro is novelty, at least in this video, is about the environment's novelty. If you have the opportunity to enter yourself into a new environment with new surroundings and everything's just new, that could be a great, powerful catalyst to actually implement these tips and trust yourself enough to follow through on them, because you'll know, like, this new environment, it's something about like the new aura or whatever. It's just easier to implement new patterns. However, that novelty can be implemented in a different way, in addition, if you wish, to the environment one. But if you can't, for whatever reason, the environment one, you can lean on this other one, which we'll be discussing the week after next week, which is identity. Novelty in identity. I'll explain that more in that next video, the video after next week's. But for right now, let's go ahead and wrap up with the outro. All right, guys, a couple of key takeaways to wrap up here. First, we talked this week about environment and the power that the environment has to influence our decisions and our habits, regardless of whether we've taken conscious control over that environment or not. So we may as well, right? And when we do that, we achieve at least 2 things. The first is clarity. When we design a rule or a set of rules for ourselves for the environment itself, or we assign room assignments to specific areas in our room, and we declare the purpose of specific rooms, or we use specific declarations and so on and so forth, we clarify what it is that's expected of us, what it is that the purpose is of a certain area, and that way we remove or we lessen the decision-making burden that we're otherwise left with. So in the morning, for example, we're no longer anymore deciding, where do I go, when do I do it, do I work out today, do I work out tomorrow, and so on and so forth. We already know this is the plan, this is what's expected, and we can follow it much easier. The second is influence. Our environment is influencing us anyway, and so by consciously designing it, we're leveraging the cues in that environment to tend us towards good behavior or good habits and tend us away from bad habits by decreasing or at least lessening the temptation towards our bad habits and increasing the amount and the intensity or whatever of the invitations towards good habits. And the last thing that I want to say here before we wrap up, guys, is that willpower, my friends, which is what most people rely on for change, it's not a reliable source of lasting change. And the reason for that is because it's what's called exhaustible. Willpower is an exhaustible source, which just means that in the morning, it's more powerful than it is in the afternoon. You don't have as much willpower in the afternoon, and that's why it's easier to take the donut. So instead of using and relying on willpower, what we should be doing is designing. I'll see you next week.